Hello, this is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. Today we're going to be covering CDFM Module 3, Competency 4, which is Auditing, out of the 2020 study guide. All right, so let's begin on top of page 5, 3.4.5, which deals with the legal and regulatory requirements for audit. So you need to be familiar with the Chief Financial Officers Act of 1990. Why? Because it comes up significantly a number of times in these study guides. CFO Act is what says why in the Army we have GFIBs, because it says we need to have an auditable financial system. So for audit purposes, we are required to have the right measures in place. So it was the CFO Act of 1990 that required. And if you do your knowledge checks at the beginning of these study guides, that will also help you to remember some of the key terms. Even though I don't go through the knowledge check, but I would recommend that you do that after you've gone through the material. So I'll leave that information up to you. So I am going all the way over to the overview for audits on page 9. This is pretty much information purposes in this section also, so no calculations. So auditing is an essential element for accountability. So again, if you have, especially when you deal with funding, if you don't have your checks and balances in place, then people tend to do illegal things with the funds. That's the best way to put it. So on page 10, so earlier we talked about GAO, we talked about Office of Management and Budget, who they are, why they're important. So on page 10, it references for auditing, it references the Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards, the GAGAS, and another name for that is the GAO Yellow Book. So in previous videos, you hear me talk about the stoplight effect of these regulations. You have the GAO Red Book, the GAO Yellow Book, and the GAO Green Book. The Red Book deals with appropriation law. The Yellow Book, you just see, deals with auditing. And the Green Book deals with internal control. And in this section, you won't see it until you get to like the last page. It gives a verbiage on it. But remember that stoplight effect for these regulations as you go through each section. So the GAO Yellow Book is a regulation at the GAO level that deals with auditing. That's what they're saying here, and what the do's and don'ts, the Inspector General at the DOD, and we're going to look at some of those auditing organization in the DOD level. All right, so there are four, what you need to know, 4 GAO standards, 4 general standards for audits. Auditor independence, professional judgment, competence, and quality control. So a list of things, you need to know what they are, who they are, what they do, what they mean. So when I jumble them up together, mix them up, then you'll know which is which. So auditor independence is exactly what it says. Auditor is an external organization coming in to review your operation. You don't want that individual to have any, let's say I am their rater and they're coming in to do an audit on my organization. That person, that individual probably will not be as honest because they're like, hey, they're going to be worried about how I rate them, for example. So auditor independence, I need someone external. Internal control inspections are what we do amongst ourselves. We have our own IC person that come and evaluate us. But remember, they have their bias because they want our organization to look good. So they may see things that are not there versus an external auditor will come in. They have no ties with our organization, no threats. Auditor professional judgment. We want them to be professional. It's not a hey, you, got you type of experience that we want to have. We want to truly be able to identify any issues that we have in our processes, in our operation, in our regulations, in our SOPs, standard operating procedures, so that we can fix it and we be able to be good stewards of taxpayers' dollars. So professional judgment is necessary. On page 14, auditor competence. So competence meaning being a professional. So just like you are studying to be competent or be viewed as competent because, right, even though that's really what you're doing, even though you do your job on a daily basis, and it doesn't mean that, hey, if you're not CDFM, then you're not competent. But when you have that tag behind your name, it shows that you've gone the extra step to show your professionalism, your competence in your job. So auditors also have to be certified. They also have to do CPE credits. When you read through, I think the second paragraph on page 14, just like we do as CDFMs, we have to do 80 hours of training every 2 years and at least 20 per year. So you can't wait until 1 year, the first year you do all 80 hours, and then the second year you'd be like, okay, I'm done. Kind of like what we do with the DOD certification, because I've seen people, they don't do anything the first year, or they might do 1 or 2 training, and then the last year they just knock stuff out. Well, with CDFM, you have to do at least 20 hours. And you keep track of your hours. You have your certificates. Just like you do with the DOD certification, you don't upload your certificates, but these are inspectable items. If you say you're CDFM, then you need to show me, okay, you say you did all this training for your certification. Well, let's see what you've done. So auditor competence is the same on paragraph 2. CPE hours, at least 20, actually, let me see, yeah. And at least 24 of the 80 hours be directly related to government auditing. So as an auditor, of that 80 hours, 24 hours needs to be directly related to auditing. So like us, budget analysts, program analysts, we can pick any topic, but auditors have to be 24 hours in auditing. And then finally, you have quality control. So an audit organization themselves have to be audited every 3 years. So that's what this is saying here on page 3, 4, 15. So those are the basic GAO standards. All right, so we have different types of audit. You have financial audits, right? Because we got the financial systems that we use. We use GFIBs, we use RLAS, we use OR, whatever systems we use. Those systems, the financial data that they spit out, we need to audit those, and then audit our performance, our operation, our processes that we have in place. Attestation engagements is when we identify specific areas, because sometimes as a supervisor or manager, you have particular areas in your business, in your operation that you're not comfortable with, that's performing to standards. So you can have an auditor come in where you have preconceived ideas in what they need to look for. You work that out together versus a regular audit is them just come swooping in and just, okay, let's see what you got going on here. So attestation engagement standards vary on the level of agreed upon procedures. You agree upon what they're going to come in and audit. So the GAO yellow books, what it talks about each type of audit is on page 17. They're pretty much all the same. Make sure you uphold the financial standards, auditing standards. The DOD audit standards on page 18. And then we're going to look at the DOD organizations on page 19. So the 4 main DOD audit organization is the DODIG, Inspector General. So don't get mixed up with these generals, because as I said it, I just thought about it. Remember, GAO is the Comptroller General. At the DOD level, the DODIG, Inspector General, is in charge of auditing. The GAO is in charge of auditing at Congress level. So know where these terms go. Comptroller General is in charge of GAO, who is the auditing agency for Congress. DOD Inspector General is the individual or the title position that's in charge of auditing for the DOD level. Army Audit Agency, Naval Audit Agency, and the Air Force Audit Agency on page 19. And then when you flip over to the bottom of page 21, although not an individual or a major auditing organization, another audit organization within the Department of Defense is a Defense Contract Audit Agency. So make sure you know that piece of it, that even though it's not DODIG, Army, Navy, Air Force Audit Agency, but the Contract Audit Agency is another major audit organization that audits financial performance and attestation engagements within the Department of Defense. Terms are explained in the chart on page 22. Financial performance attestation, it gives you the description and the standards. And then 23 just tells you that sometimes an audit organization can perform other duties other than auditing. So that's what it's saying at the bottom of page 23, non-audit services. So the phases of an audit on page 25 is clearly plan, review, report. Your planning, of course, in any operation takes longer because you have to determine, if I'm going to plan to do an audit on an organization, what are we going to look at? We typically don't have enough manpower to look at every single task that organization performs. So you have to determine what's the scope, what are we doing, what's the requirement, who do we have that can do it. So the planning talks about the boundary, the scope. So that's what they start with on page 25. The review itself on page 26, after we do the actual inspection, is it quality data? Do we have enough data to make a call, gathering the evidence? And then our report as an auditor on page 27, the report phase. And what it's saying in the report phase, the auditor report, you have three options. Let me point them out because, yeah, it doesn't really go. So if you look under the fourth bullet, it says types of opinion, auditor opinions. You have modified, disclaimer, and adverse. So unmodified, if it's my overall rating is unmodified, that means best. Modified, there are some exceptions. You identify the exception. If you identify deficiencies, then they typically will give recommendation in how to fix. So when you look through the report phase, all the list of things that goes in that report. But the key thing here is to identify the types of opinion: unmodified, modified, disclaimer, and adverse. 28, the concept of an audit finding. Auditors often tend to use the word finding to identify the result of what they found. Historically, this conceptual framework evolved under performance audit. However, in the current version of the Yellow Book, GAO advocates that this same conceptual framework is used. So the findings can be used in any type of audit. The elements of a traditional finding: condition, what it is; criteria, what should it be; what went wrong; what were the causes. And then as an auditor, if you identify efficiencies, whether it's monetary or non-monetary, it's identified in the findings. So potential benefits, monetary benefits, where you can save money, save time, increase morale. That's a non-monetary benefit. So think of some examples of what equates to a monetary versus a non-monetary benefit. And okay, if you can put a dollar amount on the savings, then it's monetary, not non-monetary. And then on page 30 goes into audit review of internal controls. So internally, we have the IC sections, internal control sections, that we operate to evaluate our own operation. And as I mentioned, that last paragraph is where it mentions the federal government standards for internal control. The GAO Green Book is where you will go to find GAO level authoritative information on internal control. And then auditors come in and evaluate our internal control processes. because hopefully when we do our internal controls that we are identifying some of these issues before an auditor comes in to evaluate. So remember, GAO, red book, yellow book, green book, appropriation law, auditing, and internal control. All right, so this concludes the end of CDFM Module 3, Competency 4, Auditing in the Federal Government, out of the 2020 study guide. So be sure to share, click like if you like the video, if you want to give a comment on whatever it is, please go ahead and leave some comments or share the videos with others who are studying for their CDFM designation. So this is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. Thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you guys again next time.